growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
Hey everyone, you're back on the cheat code. Of course, I'm Justin, joined as always by my friend, Mr. Josh Wagner over there. What's up, Josh?
What's up, everybody?
Joined from the home gym. So super excited to have our latest guest with us. I don't even know when I met Lauren, but it's been, I feel like, well over a decade. She is currently a practice lead over at Winning by Design. She's a co-founder and board member over at Women in Revenue, and just a general badass. So welcome Lauren Goldstein to the show.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I think it's definitely well over a decade, and I always love to have a little interaction, whether podcast or face-to-face. So thanks for having me.
For sure. We appreciate you doing it. So, as you know, our overall topic here is cheat codes and cheats. And some people view those as, cheating as a negative. I certainly don't. Everyone's got to have something that they can lean on in order to, do things just a little bit better, a little bit faster, most of the time, than what everyone else is trying to do, right? And when we first started talking about your topic, it just, clicked for me 1,000%. As we're kind of talking even before the show, it's something I'm trying to write a post on right now. And as we work with our different port codes, it's so difficult to kind of package up and distill down what that quality is that separates one organization from another in terms of pace and in terms of, just overall drive within the organization. And so I won't steal the thunder in terms of announcing this, but tell us a little bit about like how you think about that cheat from your perspective.
Yeah. So when I was thinking a little bit about what my cheat is, when you think about a cheat, I actually prefer the term like force multiplier, right? Like cheat definitely has some challenging connotations, but what you're after is like, what are the force multipliers in business? Like what really gets us to the end game? And for the last, I don't know how long it's been, maybe 20 years, I've gotten into running. If I get to brag for a second, I've completed over 25 marathons. I've qualified for the Boston Marathon 3 times and have entered and completed the Boston Marathon 3 times. And in all of those hours of running, and let me tell you, it is hours and hours and miles, you start to think about like, well, what if I were to stop? Like, what would happen? And you don't let yourself go there. You just start to go, and you just keep going until you hit that finish line. And along the way, trust me, there's a lot of like mind games. But what actually gets you to the finish line each and every time, barring those, and I feel bad for those that have big injuries along the way, but barring a big injury, what gets you there is momentum. And when you think about the physics of momentum, it's about putting something in motion and keeping it in motion. And when I think about how that applies to business, it's that constant forward accomplishment. And I know we'll talk a little bit about like what happens when it stops, but I'll just pause there for a moment and say, I believe the cheat code or the force multiplier in business is around momentum.
Yeah, I mean, such a great topic because, and without naming names, right? Like Josh and I are always kind of comparing different organizations that we work with and invest in. And, there's something intangible there that just feels really different when that organization's clicking. And, it often is a tone set by the founder. I'm curious, like what experiences have you seen that kind of led you to that realization? And like, what does that feel like for you when something has momentum, just kind of in a tangible way?
So when you think about the world that we live in, and especially in this growth stage world that a lot of the companies that we work with are in, this B2B SaaS scale up, there are 1,000 reasons why we should stop, right? And I correlate that back to running. Like, I'm thirsty. I got to go to the bathroom. Like, my leg hurts, like whatever. There's a million reasons why to stop. And sometimes you might need to slow down to do those things or stop for just a second. But I see that in organizations where there's 1,000 reasons to stop. We got a new CRO. We are about to change out our CRO. We got some other executive. We're merging. We're pulling out. Like, there's so many different kind of I hate to use the word excuses for why to stop. And unfortunately, when you think about how much those organizations need to accomplish, that stop and start does not do them well. And so that kind of spirit of continuing to move forward towards the goals. And, again, sometimes you have to adjust the pace, but I think that organizations that are focused on their goals and not stopping and starting are the ones that are successful. And I'm sure you both have seen what happens when we do stop for too long.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I feel like it's also become like a really cool thing to like say, I'm not going to, I hate this answer when you're interviewing a candidate. It's like, what would you do like first 30 days? Like, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to come in and listen. And like, obviously, like understanding what you're walking into is a good thing, right? But like, you want to be able to provide value at the same time. And I feel like that's one of those critical areas where you can start almost, pinpointing what type of person someone is. Like, sure, you want to be informed, but at the same time, like, how are you going to, certainly in a startup, like, how are you going to provide value day one? Really hard to do when you're just saying, like, I'm going to be on the sidelines for the first 30, 60 days and getting to know people, and then I'm going to come up with this magic answer.
Maybe those rules apply in a big political corporation, but I think the audience that we're connecting with here don't have that luxury. And I don't know that serves you well to sit on the sidelines and watch the race. I think you got to get in and do hard things from the beginning.
Well, yeah, and talking about growth, I mean, we're all working with growth stage companies, right? And a big part of that is sales. I know the three of us here all have a sales background, right? So you know how it is when things are feeling stale and like you feel like pipeline is slowing down or it's shrinking or whatever. What do? You just do something. It doesn't even matter. It's like, oh, there's someone on my LinkedIn I haven't talked to in a year. I'm going to call them.
Yeah.
And it starts to snowball from there. Like literally doing something is that first thing. So what are some of the things that you've seen that are like those fire starters, right? That get people going when you feel like you're stuck?
I mean, that's a really good and very specific question. I'd have to think about that a little bit more, Josh, to give you like a perfect answer. But things like you said, like, okay, I'm going to connect with 10 more people this week that I haven't spoken to in a while. One of the hacks, if you will, that I used to, believe in is, again, get on LinkedIn, get on a plane, get on the phone. And it was like, what are 10 new starts that I can accomplish this week? And I guarantee you, they always led to something. When you think about momentum, one of the most overlooked opportunities, back to, the cheat code, I think one is conversations with our customers. Like, how often are we doing that with our customers? Just getting on the phone. Again, I can cite dozens of examples of just picking up the phone. Hey, how are things? Like, how is the project that we did with you 2 years ago? How are we performing? Or 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, how is it performing? They always lead to new opportunities. And then the second is around partners. I think that, Justin, we have a lot of experiences, especially, in our days working in pretty, sophisticated tech ecosystems, picking up the phone, asking how we can be helpful. That's what really propelled business forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult. I mean, it's getting a little bit easier or less frowned upon, but like just getting in front of someone like physically, right? Like that was just such a huge, to use your word, force multiplier in, companies and roles in my past. Like I can think of one example, like I was in a payment tech company and like our entire go-to-market and value add was based on integration, right? And so it's everything that we marketed, it's everything that we sold, it's certainly, how we talked about ourselves to our clients and thought about their ROI. And we went out, it was fairly new to the company, and I went out and spoke to this one customer, and they weren't using the integration whatsoever. Like literally, like we could have been, a standalone solution. And so it was just so eye-opening in terms of, all right, what are we doing from a customer enablement perspective? Like, what's our onboarding process look like? Like, you're right, like so many different doors just start to open up when you have those, certainly customer conversations, but I think just conversations in general. And I still think face-to-face is such a game changer.
I mean, I think the other, just to tap one more piece onto it, that's something that the whole executive suite should be doing too. Picking up the phone, talking to customers is not just for the the CS or the sales leadership. I mean, that's for everybody in the organization. And it's always amazing. I mean, as we've said, every time you have those customer conversations, not only do new opportunities get unlocked, but you often learn something that allows you, again, to kind of keep the momentum going forward, and making sure that, again, you're pacing toward that end goal.
Justin alluded to it a little bit earlier, but how do you think you foster that mentality? Because I know you said, like, yeah, the exec suite should be doing it as well, and completely agree with you. But just empowering people to just do and create momentum sometimes. How do you foster that internally? Have you seen anything work really well?
I mean, I think there's a handful of both, KPI setting and just good old fashioned enthusiasm. I have this quote. I used it for my college application, I don't know, maybe 30 or so years ago. But it was a Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I'm probably not getting it quite right. But it's that nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. And I really use that as my guiding light. You can train, right? Like as a runner, as somebody in the business world, you can train, and having a plan where you know how many miles a day and whether you need speed work. And, there's always a training plan to get you to that end goal. And I think that's kind of half the answer, Josh, to your question. Like, I think you need a training plan that everyone's bought into and that works. But you also just need some good old-fashioned rah-rah. Like, you need people to be optimistic. You need them. I think I had shared previously, there was a race I did last October. It was the Portland Marathon. And at mile 7, like, I don't know what happened, but my body went off the rails. And it was, green face, the whole thing. Like, it was not going to be a pretty ending. And I just had support from friends along the course. I had my own inner kind of voice speaking, like, you can do hard things, you can get this done, like, you need a mantra. And I think that goes a long way. I guess that's where, culture comes in. That's where having positive leadership comes in. So, long answer to your question, but I think it's a combination of a good training plan and a positive attitude.
Yeah.
Well, this running talk is
awesome. Yeah. Sorry.
This running talk is exhausting me here. I've done one half marathon and I never want to do it again. But
I live in a better climate than you for that, Justin.
That's true. That's true.
Well, we have a friend, Justin and I do, that says, if you see me running, you better run, because I don't run. Something is about to happen.
So I guess we should probably also deal with it right up front because, again, like anything can be spun in the wrong direction. And there's certainly a downside to embracing a mentality that's harmful here as well. So, like, what's the difference between creating momentum and leading by example and versus, working 12 hours a day, burning yourself out, like just, pushing everyone to the absolute max all the time? Like, obviously there's a happy medium there, but how do you create that balance?
I mean, I think when you think about the grind, and I think of the antithesis of momentum or pacing, like the antithesis of the opposite is the grind. And I think you can grind for like little bits of time, especially as I think you, get more years under your belt. I don't think you can grind forever, though. And I think that's one lesson that we've learned over the last many years, is that if you grind forever, you burn people out and you lose people along the way, right? They burn out. I guess that's the good and bad of someone like me who's a marathon runner. Like, I pace because I know what the finish line looks like. Mm-hmm. And I know that if I blow out my first, half marathon, I am not going to make it there. And that's, I guess, the beauty of having a good training plan is you have a good sense of what your body's capable of. And I think that applies to the business world too. Like, we know what we're capable of, and it's about pacing to get to the finish and knowing when to do some sprints and knowing when to pull back a little.
When you see that's a lesson that we've learned, are you talking about, lessons at Winning by Design or just throughout your career?
Both. I mean, the interesting thing at Winning by Design is that we work with hundreds of companies. And so we see a lot of like what works and what doesn't work at scale. We see what makes teams perform really well. And I'll give you the magic ingredient, like, no surprise, having an aligned process, like having a plan and KPI that people follow, like that wins every day.
Yeah, the reason I was curious if that was a winning by design thing. So like, I know the work that you guys do and it's a very, different area, but very similar. Like under the consultancy banner, it's so difficult to, like, every time you win in terms of a client, like that's more work to do and a lot of work for a team, right? Like, and to balance all those projects, like, is certainly something that, we were always trying to keep an eye on at LeadMD and try to keep in a healthy balance. And it's just, I think, consulting or agency work or any sort of services business is just one of the most difficult environments, I think, to work in because of that aspect, right? Like that tendency to like, hey, everything is billable and like we've got to be doing more work and that drives profit and revenue and so on. And so I love, kind of stories and lessons from those environments because I do think that, yeah, there's so many additional complexities now in a services-based business from a SaaS company.
Yeah. But I mean, listen, in the SaaS world, and that's the view that I am looking into these days, those organizations where there's a superstar culture, they'll do well for a moment in time, but they won't do well over the long run. And it's those companies that have really defined process that follow what the superstars are doing, but allow, an average player to be rock stars. Those are the organizations that are winning in the long run.
Yeah, I don't want to lose track of something you said a second ago, though. You said that you can pace yourself because you know the finish line. And as an organization scales and grows, every person you add gets further and further away from the founder and their view of the finish line.
That's a really
right.
Yeah.
So that enthusiasm and that vision of what the finish line is needs to be repeated constantly over and over and over again. And as you know, before Justin and I partnered, I worked for him as a member of the sales team for about a decade. And that's one thing I give him a lot of credit for, was just repeating the same shit over and over and over again. As much as it was annoying at the time, you look back on it and you're like, okay, great, because I knew what I was going towards because of that. So, and we see it now in our portfolio, right? Like the founder has to consistently vision set because they don't know your vision. It's not their company, right? So how are they going to be as enthusiastic as you? One, they're not, but two, you still got to drive that thing. So I do think that's a really important thing you said. You can pace yourself because you know the finish line.
Yeah. And, to take that one step further, and I hate to use all these running analogies, but I'm telling you, it's like such a perfect analogy for life. So my best time that I ever got, 3 hours and 38 minutes. It was my PR and a BQ in Sacramento, but I followed a pacer. So I knew what my plan was, but I had the reinforcements of a pacer, right? And you bring that into the business world. And yes, you need your CEO and your C-suite to be, constantly kind of repeating and redirecting the vision as necessary. But you need your frontline managers, right? You need reinforcements throughout the race to make sure that the team's, moving forward in a collective, purpose-driven fashion. And that's what creates success. We see that too in all the B2B SaaS companies that we work with. Again, a differentiator between those that are succeeding and those aren't is the strength, the coaching culture that those frontline managers bring into play.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of what I'm going to ask next in terms of like momentum killers and what kills momentum in organizations, because I agree. I think that, middle management gets such a bad rap. I think it's probably one of the most important aspects to any organization, because there's no way that you as an executive team or even, VPs, SVP level can see into the granularity of what's happening in each team. You need someone to kind of translate that direction and that message into something that's highly tangible and means something to that team. And I just view that middle management layer as such a connector in that equation. But what else? What do you see consistently, on that inverse as momentum killers?
Yeah. I mean, listen, there are the things that we can't control, like the markets and the ups and downs in the market. There's things that, that I just want to say are kind of like outside of everyone's control, but it's important to focus on the things that we can control, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard like, well, we need to put this on hold because ... I mean, that is like, if there's one like death of momentum. It's we got to put this on hold because ... And as I shared earlier, more often than not, it's the coming and going of somebody in the C-suite. Like, let's just wait. Well, we all know you bring a new person on board and like, they don't just jump into action on day one. They need time to ramp. And so I don't know that I have dozens of deal killers, or momentum killers, but I think that's the like, well, let's put this on hold. And
I'd love to see some survey data on how many times those that's and those thises actually get picked back up again. Because if there's one thing, and I love this about startups, but like there's no like central repository across the organization that says like, hey, here's all of our prioritized projects, everything that progressed to 40% got put on hold, right? Like unless there's someone driving that forward, it just kind of tends to evaporate. So I'd love to see some stats around that. It has to be abysmal, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure there are actually. I mean, our organization uses OKRs to, really define like what the pacing is going to look like and when it's going to be done by. And listen, there's plenty of OKRs. I'm sure you guys do this too, where at the end of the quarter or even mid-quarter, you're like, you know what, we're done with
Scratch it. Yes.
Scratch it. And listen, I don't want to say that's a bad idea. Like not everything that you put on paper is an idea that should move forward. But some of the big rocks that are around the business vision or around sales goals, I mean, those are the big ones that you need to continue to march toward.
Well, that's probably even, earlier, I think Josh asked, like, how do you see people like fostering momentum in a really tactical manner? I think like great leaders, managers, bosses have to figure out a way to make that effort count for something still, right? Like, so even if you can just take a piece of that initiative or that project and demonstrate how it's going to, be repurposed into something else or how it benefited a goal or how it's going to inform this new project. Like, I feel like those are ways that are, just kind of unspoken tactics that you can use to ensure that everyone knows like things are still moving forward. And I didn't just waste a ton of time, which is obviously precious.
Yeah. So I think that, one of the things with going back to your running analogy, because I kind of do the same thing in terms of training. I don't run, but I do train. And you find that you can't.
Different bikes.
There's a couple of bikes behind me. I got all kinds of stuff in here.
That's just window dressing.
Okay.
Yeah. But, you always find, like you said, you talk about pacing yourself. And I think it's important because you can't always grind all the time. I can't always be sprints. There's going to be peaks and valleys in your energy for sure. But again, if you have something that you're driving towards, it's a lot easier to keep some momentum going. Like I can't lift hard 5 days a week anymore. It's just not possible. My body can't sustain it. Right. So I make sure I get 2, right? Some weeks I might get 5, but I've got to keep the momentum by having a minimum of 2. And I think you can apply that, like your running analogy, in the business world. It's like at minimum, even if the energy systems are completely taxed, these things have to be done, right? That just keep the ball moving forward. And I think that's an important thing as a founder, as you're growing a team, is to make sure and I think use the OKR framework as a way to maybe look at that. Like these are the pillars. If they're not being at least worked at MVP level all the time, we're going to fail, right? So, and being able to understand when it's time to ramp up and scale that energy system up for a sprint and then be able to throttle it back down.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing that I would want to share, and I think it's important. You asked the question a few minutes ago, Justin, about the grind and what the difference is between kind of like laying it all out there and grinding along versus momentum. And while I do think momentum is about getting to the end goal, there are times like that race I talked about in October where I just felt awful, where I had to really make myself as comfortable as I could be when I was incredibly uncomfortable. And I don't know that that's something that, that all kind of business professionals, prescribe to, but I think it's something important. And whether you're an individual contributor or a new manager or somebody in the executive suite, I do think that there's moments for us professionally where we are uncomfortable. We have to make a call that makes us uncomfortable, or we have to, make a decision that is uncomfortable. But there is this sense of like needing to be comfortable when perhaps things are a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was a great book called Getting Naked that I used to make required reading, which is just all about that subject, and frankly couldn't agree more. When you're so in terms of like resources of an organization, right? Like you can't do everything,
Yeah.
within your four walls. And so again, I don't want to monopolize this talking about partnerships because somehow we always end up bringing that topic up in these things. But like, what is how can organizations leverage,
Yeah.
resources, partners, folks outside those four walls to maintain that momentum, to your point, so that, people aren't getting burnt out and that not everything's falling on, our shoulders.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, again, as I mentioned earlier on, I think that partnerships, many hands make light work. And whether that's inside the building, if you will, and I know the notion of a building is kind of antiquated, but whether that's inside your organization or whether that's tapping into those, in the days of many organizations selling services, I always knew that there were tech teams out there that had sales forces that were, 100 times bigger than mine. And if I could just enable them and tap into that bandwidth, that we would benefit from it. And in fact, that was absolutely the case. I don't know what partnerships look like for all of the organizations in your portfolio, but many, I'm certain, can benefit from having a partner ecosystem. Many. So it's about figuring out like where that alignment is, typically around having a shared vision of your ICP, and making sure that there's alignment in terms of culture and how you service that ICP. And then ultimately making sure that you can enable them in a way that they can, be a representative of what you have to offer, or be close enough to it that they bring you to the table.
Yeah, I mean, putting that sense of momentum into the partner organization, I think, is almost probably the singular definition of success or failure there, right? Like so many partnerships are written on a piece of paper, and there may even be a great plan laid out, and then it just gets siloed down into, this very kind of mundane motion. And you mentioned like portfolio companies, like the orgs that we're working with that are creating excitement, now, obviously not just at the superficial level, but on joint customer wins, on the value that they're providing, like it, and then they're staying, top of mind. They're again, creating just that awareness within that partner org is they stay head and shoulders amongst the rest, and certainly their competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think that's how you and I got to know each other over the years, is that we were building momentum and energy around a shared partner who was really fantastic to work with. And that definitely allowed us both to grow our businesses as a result.
Yeah, even if you did a side by side right now of a couple of companies within our portfolio, the one that is heavily embracing that one-to-many channel relationship or partner relationship, as you described it, is seeing probably 10x the pipeline right now than the other who hasn't figured it out, right? And really putting that energy towards that partner ecosystem and enabling them, embracing them, showing that enthusiasm as you laid it out. And it's a huge differentiator, especially now when outbound messaging is getting so much harder.
Right. And back to some of the points that we were discussing earlier, Josh, I'm guessing it's, I know it's the same tenants. It's, constantly picking up the phone and checking in on them, making sure that they've got enablement, discussing what the wins are, and making sure to, to get in front of those shared customers, customers together. If you're
flying out to their events, like just doing the little things that, maybe not everyone else will do.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah, I think it's really big. And when we talk about our cheat code, right, that's what it is, right? Like partner-led is a really big part of our cheat code and selling to and through partners. And it just creates momentum so much faster than trying to do it, pick off an account one by one. It's just such a hard way to go and a hard way to grow, especially in the current economic environment. So like you said, I love the idea of getting as close to your ICP as possible, finding out who shares it and where do you fill gaps. And it's such a big cheat for companies that frankly accelerate your valuation faster than you could do on a direct sales model.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a thin connection here, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about this. So you had shared a study that you guys put out under, I believe it's under Women in Revenue. I think you guys might have partnered on it. I can't remember explicitly, but and we kind of had a little bit of an exchange on LinkedIn about it. And you mentioned that, because I immediately went to and so for those that haven't seen it and you couldn't know what it is because I haven't said what it is yet, but this study is about essentially parity within salaries and compensation between men and women, right? And my immediate response to that was like, oh, I can't believe there's organizations that, aren't driving better homogeny in this area and so on. And your response was something to the effect of it's not as straightforward, or it's not just kind of the legacy mentality that stands in the way here. I think there's a certain aspect of momentum that comes into that in terms of and Josh, actually, we just talked about this with a founder the other day, but there tends to be personality differences, right? Just in terms of negotiation and how hard people drive towards things. We got accused of being all men and driving really hard towards something that we were arguing for. And so how do you up level that momentum within that group? I'm curious to, understand the work that you guys are doing there.
I love that question. So let me just give a little bit of context for a second for those that may not be familiar with Women in Revenue. So Women in Revenue is a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded 5 years ago by 10 women who came from the B2B tech, sales, marketing, and CS worlds. And what we realized, and it circles back to your question, that we didn't necessarily have mentors in our worlds that allowed us to know what great looked like. And, I will say that, as a runner, I have always sought out better runners than myself to learn from. Coaches, just people who had been doing it longer than me. I didn't become a runner until I was in my 20s. And by seeking out people that are better than you, you learn and you up level, right? I remember wanting to break a 4-hour marathon. That was a really big goal for me. And I needed to get coaching in order to get there. But once I got a coach, I was physically capable of it. And I think going back to the salary study that was done by Women in Revenue, the huge variance between what women are earning and what men are earning. Some of it may be organizations that are just unfair, but I think a lot of it is that women have not necessarily had mentors to say, what should I be asking? How do I negotiate? How do I push a little bit harder on this? And so I don't know whether you call it momentum or mentorship, but I think there is, as you said, kind of a thin line that connects them very closely. So I think getting a mentor and using that to help propel you forward is absolutely in lockstep with what we mean by momentum.
I'm just curious, do you guys do that with one-to-one pairings, or is it a combination of one-to-many and one-to-one? What's the most effective way to kind of impart that mentorship?
Yeah, great question. So all of the above. So, if you go to womeninrevenue.org, it's free to be a member, and you can get one-to-one mentoring. We have what are called flash mentorship. So let's say you just want a mentor for a moment because you're negotiating your next pay raise or you're negotiating a new job. You can have flash mentorship. And we also have huddles, which is maybe a 1 to 15 or 20 ratio on a topic. Maybe it's about building your personal brand. Maybe it's about how to build, your first board deck.
Critical. Yeah, I mean, you think about that, most founders, not only women, but such a resource that's difficult to find from kind of the horse's mouth aspect. There's so much information online, but to the point earlier, so much less effective than getting someone there that actually has been to the finish line, perhaps multiple times, and that's willing to kind of take that time and impart that to someone else. So great organization, great mission, love it all around.
What are you seeing women in the group seeing the biggest strides forward? What are some of the big macro level stuff that's just breaking through?
I mean, I don't know that it's, I'll be honest, we're an organization that really wants to be grassroots. And so I think it's the sum of many parts, Josh. We made a very deliberate decision that we weren't going to, be lobbyists or, fighting the big fight from the ivory tower. But it was really about helping one woman at a time get her next pay raise, get her next job, get her next speaking placement on a panel. And so we have 7,500 members. I will go out on a limb in saying that all of those 7,500 women probably have many moments where their mentor or a network or piece of information that they exchanged over Slack helped them in their career. So I think we are the sum of many, many parts.
Incredible.
So that's a great transition. So Lauren, number one, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Always love talking to you. Great information around a topic that I absolutely love. If people want to find out more about yourself, Women in Revenue, anything that you're up to, where can they go?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. Lauren Schleifer Goldstein on LinkedIn. Or they're
going to get a spelling exam at the same time.
Right? Or you can find me at winningbydesign.com or womeninrevenue.org.
Awesome. Love it. Well, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. Thanks everyone else for joining in. Absolutely. Give us a like and a follow, share the stuff out there, do all of that stuff that people ask for. But most of all, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you guys for having me.